Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Amateur's Mind. Haven't done this for ages, and now I have got two very suitable games to have a look at what's happening in the mind of the amateurs. We are here going through a game played by a 2100 versus 1700. We are analyzing it from Black's point of view, but that's really not that important. The opening is the Slav Meran, or the semi-Slav as they tend to call it too. I prefer the Meran. And he white played a3, which is a complete lemon. Bishop d3 is to be preferred, or queen c2. Those are the two main continuations. a3, to put it very bluntly, doesn't really make any sense, because black wasn't going to play bishop b4, and even if he was, stopping it is not worth it. Bishop d6, the correct move. Bishop d3, and now we are back to normal Meran structure, and it actually would have made sense for black to take like in the Meran main lines, and after b5, bishop d3, a6, play for c5. I'm not saying that a3 is useless in this structure, but white could have spent that tempo on 5 million more suitable moves. Instead black castle, which is fine. White castle too, and now black played e5. Now this is a bit of a funny decision. Fundamentally it's good, but I think I would have preferred for black to go this way, because now I get to do the same break in the center, but without compromising the pawn structure. And after the masses of swaps, black's position is somewhat more roomy. It's more pleasant to play this because the bishop is blocked in, and it can't develop this way. We can't develop to the diagonal because of this bishop is putting up quite a bit of pressure there. So overall it's just a more pleasant endgame straight away from the opening. And if they don't take, then after queen e7, e4, knight b6, bishop f5, knight b d5, we have a beautiful Meran structure. So early e5, my only worries about this was that exactly we got into this structure, which is totally fine, but I think the other one is probably a little bit easier to play for black. So now we are in an isolated pawn-pawn structure. I have spoken on the channel about this 75,176 times, so I don't want to really repeat myself. The point is that black needs to keep pieces on, black needs to have some initiative going. White is aiming to swap off everything and exploit the weak pawn that is if it's an endgame. Now, after bishop e2, knight takes d5 is actually a threat. Normally it isn't. But now, because of the knight went to e5 very early, we don't have bishop takes h2, and if I take on f3, then both bishop takes, or after knight takes, queen takes. If we take queen takes, back also steps out of this discovered check. So the pawn is actually hanging, and I'm thinking what the best way would be to defend it. And it's a tricky business. Funnily enough, one of the ideas that popped up in my head was knight c6 back, because as I said, we don't want to trade pieces. This one opens up the bishop's diagonal, but again it feels like moving back and forth into the center and then back home again might not be the best. A somewhat better option is perhaps to play something like bishop e6, defending the pawn and continuing development. Black played here a6, which is a tactical blunder that both parties fell for, because now knight d5 is simply capturable, and there's nothing here. So knight takes, bishop takes, and the knight is sufficiently guarded, so black is just lost. That was a very poor mistake. Yeah, so bishop e6 was perhaps best, I would say. It's very typical, by the way, that people fall for each other's tactics by blindly believing, especially on this level. So an important lesson to learn from this is that you should never, ever, ever believe in your opponent's bluffs. And that actually applies regardless of their rating. So on club level especially, I very highly recommend you to check out tactics that are supposedly not working, because you will find that half of the time it's either miscalculated or it's simply a bluff, like right now. Okay, king h1, obviously stepping out of the non-existing check tactics so that d5 would hang. Bishop b8. Now my eyes nearly fell out when I saw this. because this is a super ugly move. Very logical and super ugly. Logical in the sense that moving the bishop back on this diagonal would open up the d-file for the queen, protecting the d5 pawn. And I spent a solid 5 minutes trying to find an explanation to myself why this lovely gentleman wouldn't put the bishop back onto c7 where it actually belongs, so that he wouldn't block the rook in and he could continue developing with the bishop, and also queen d6, creating a checkmate threat down there, which is the absolute stock standard way to play this position. So I have no idea why bishop b8 was played, but it shouldn't have at all. It's a really, really bad choice and a very bad square for the bishop, because it blocks the rook in and there is no reason to go in here. It's an altogether different meta when the rook is already outside of this mass of bishops here and the rooks have already been connected. Then dropping back to b8 is totally fine and is best. And I think this is where the confusion came, that the black player must have seen a structure that looked like this, and I'm playing lemony moves on purpose now just to demonstrate the concept. Yeah, whatever. And then bishop back. Now here it's perfectly sound and is the best square. It prepares for the black queen to go up to d6 and go mate there. And it doesn't put the bishop awkwardly on c7 on the rook's open file, where there are lots of dirty tactics possible. So what I'm thinking here is what I call the amateur pattern recognition, that they have seen a move somewhere, sometime, when it worked. They see that this is a possibility in their own position too, which is very similar in structure to what they compare it to, but there is no understanding of why the move was played and why the move in that position was good, and it may not be that good here. So bishop b8 here is obviously utterly ugly because it blocks in the rook. Now luckily for him it got released immediately. So now it's all okay. Bishop e6, knight e2. Now knight e2 is obviously aiming to go to the very crucial d4 square to guard, to blockade the d5 pawn, which is another very important principle we need to follow against the isolated pawn. However, it is also a very important principle that when your opponent leaves the center, you occupy the center. Sadly, black here started a plan that, in my opinion, is a total blank shot. He played bishop f5, allowing knight d4 with a tempo and then dropping the bishop back to g6. Now, in my opinion, this bishop here is totally misplaced in this structure, because we should do some stuff ideally on the king's side, so you very often need this bishop on this diagonal. The only benefit of having this bishop here is that it covers the e4 square. But other than that, it has got nothing. It's a blank diagonal. The rook will come to c1. There is nothing really that even in the long run we can achieve there. So I didn't like this maneuver at all. I would have far preferred to see something like knight e4, knight d4, queen d6, and then putting the rooks wherever they belong. And this looks to me like a quite decent plan. If knight e6, then queen takes e6, and now the bishop's pressure onto b2 is going to become quite annoying. So yeah, with bishop on g6, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Bishop d2, knight e4, very good. Bishop takes, I don't mind that either. Bishop c3, very logical. Queen f6 and f4. Now I really think that f4 should never ever be played in this structure, because that basically makes this bishop a very powerful attacker down there, as long as there are queens on the board. And black here had a very clever queen g6 move to step out of the discovery, which is what I think White might have missed when he played f4. So rook f2 was forced, and now after a simple bishop retreat, black is standing very, very comfortably. Needless to say that our best friend here went back to b8 for the second time round, causing me a massive facepalm, because oh my god, you need to connect your rooks so you don't go there. Needed to go to c7 or d6, but I would have preferred d6 now, because on c7 again it would stand on the c file. Very silly. I don't know where this is coming from, but yeah. At least it's consistently wrong, so once we fix the problem it will be fixed for good. Queen d2, f5. Now that in my book, and if you go through this game with the computer, it will not condemn many of the moves that I do, but in my opinion f5 is a horrendous positional mistake and a very, very typical impulsive thrust on this level that players of this level make all the time. And when you ask why did you play this move, I don't know, it looked good, made the bishop stronger, normally these are the arguments, solidified the center. And when you actually think about these arguments, none of them actually applies. f5 doesn't make the bishop stronger, it makes it significantly worse, because now both of these diagonals have been reduced to 0. That diagonal is utterly useless, so now the only benefit of this bishop is that it attacks g2. Solidifying the center? Not at all. It gives up the center because now the e5 square is an outpost, so in only 2 moves white gets to get into e5 if he wants to, and nothing can kick him out from there. You can say, yeah, but nothing can kick out the e4 bishop either. True, but that already was the case here. We didn't need to play f5 to make that even more unkick-outable. So in this position, if anything, actually f6 is a more logical move to blunt the bishop's diagonal and also to take away the e5 square. Not that I would play f6 here. I would probably do bishop a7, rook, develop. But yeah, f5 is terrible. It really is. And if white manages to swap these bishops off, which actually will happen in the game, then we will see the ultimate case of a very good knight, very bad bishop. So now white's objective is simply to trade these bishops, and from there on the position is going to be way better for white. So he started on this journey onto e5. Bishop a7, knight e5, there we go. And bishop d4, crystal clear, very good, very logical play by white. Queen h5, no idea what black is doing. Queen here, queen here, queen here. Very, very planless. His last chance, in my opinion, to find some counterplay here would have been to take and then grab the c, because now due to the separated white rooks, white can't oppose on the c file. And so now black still has got some sort of pressure going on, because yeah, it's difficult for white to completely disentangle this position, because if the rook goes back in order to go here, then rook c2 is a problem. Now instead we played here queen h5, which is, yeah, I always say to my students, if you don't have a plan, don't play a move. And when you're playing 30 with 35 increment, it's really a no-brainer that we're not playing moves unless we find a sound, good plan. Now this is not part of any plans at all. It's just shifting pieces around. And now you can see that unlike in the previous scenario, now it's actually white who managed to conquer the c file, and that is going to have major importance. b4, positionally again fundamentally sound, trying to block as many pawns on white as possible. Obviously black played b5 in order to free up the rook on the 7th, but positionally again it was a little bit of an iffy decision. h3, totally unnecessary, absolute waste of time. Queen d4 in my opinion would have been way better. Then probably rook c3, drop the rook back and come around, or rook c5 right away and then do that. So basically somehow start invading. h3, yeah, I mean, he does have the time to play king h2 and get out even from this pin, but I don't think it was necessary at all. Alright, good chess by white here all the way through, and the dreaded endgame has arrived, where black has got nothing. And if he still was in the illusion that this bishop was good, I think that by now he sort of started figuring out that actually that bishop is going to be the reason why he's going to lose this game. Okay. Queen trade, and basically I will speed this up from here because there was very little to note here. White opted for going for this pawn. I think from a practical viewpoint it would have been better to take this. The reason for that is because once this is gone, the king can't leave the guard of the g6 pawn, because that would make this one a passed pawn, and with the bishop stuck on e4, this pawn is ridiculously difficult to stop. So once we are in here, black, well, now knight e4 wins, so let's say I go somewhere. I then regroup the knight, and or even here and win this one too. So you see that this knight is jumping around, taking pawns. It's like an annoying boxer just chucking you the left hooks and the jabs and the left hook again, and always jumps away and hits back, and we just have nothing else to do but take the punches. Now this is not as good as a scenario, because now the black king actually could become very active. Yeah, that was very weird. Here what happened, like after bishop c6 he should have kept on coming closer. Yeah, that was strange. Here we go. And now again white finally found the correct plan, which was to put the king in the center, defend his pawn, attack this one, and now the position is over, because after the check b5 pawn drops, and so that's the game. So that was it. A quite instructive game really, because no idea why he wouldn't play here f5, but I guess he wanted to play it safe. Wow. Yeah, so it was a quite interesting game in the sense that black has showcased a couple of very typical mistakes that we see on this level. Number one is my all-time favorite, when we see a move working in another position and we play it even though we don't quite understand why we do that and why it works. And the other one is this very typical pawn thrust that so many people do without being able to justify it deeply and soundly. A position comes to my mind that I can't help to bring up in analogy to bishop b8. You find that amateur players play in the Sicilian defense knight b3 all the time, and for no reason at all. Like if you ask them why they play knight b3, they will go like, well, I don't know, they play it a lot. And that's true, they do play it a lot, but there is always a reason why knight b3 is played. And without understanding that reason, you can't decide when to do it and when not, so you just end up doing it anyway, and you end up playing very lemony moves. I will give you a practical example to see why certain times knight b3 is a good move. So this is basically the main line of the Sicilian Scheveningen, where black plays bishop d7, and now his idea is to play knight takes d4, bishop takes, and bishop c6, and thereby achieving a very harmonious position where all his pieces are on ideal squares. Right now the bishop on d7 is misplaced, it wants to be on the long diagonal, but it couldn't have been achieved by b6, because after knight takes, queen takes, bishop f3, black is rather embarrassed, or even e5 followed by bishop f3, embarrassed to a long diagonal issue, hence bishop d7. Now, having seen the plan of takes bishop c6, we immediately understand the point of knight b3, which is to keep these two in a very awkward spot. Now the bishop is bad on d7, and the knight is not really the very best customer on c6 either, and on top of that a5, due to the support from the knight on b3, is threatened. So black has to play b6, and now white immediately tries to exploit the fact that the bishop is awkwardly placed, so that after g4, g5 the knight has nowhere to go. The bishop has to drop back, and this is how theory continues. It's still opening theory, but this is how you understand why, for example, in this particular line, knight b3 is played. And likewise, bishop b8 is an example of that, that in certain lines, when in an isolated pawn structure, when the rooks are already connected, then it's a-okay to play bishop b8 back, but certainly not like when the rook is here. Then yes, of course I would have dropped back. With the rook here, I would have dropped back to b8 for sure. So imagine that in this position, I can sneak in a pair of moves like this. Now, having the bishop hanging on e5, I would drop back here in a heartbeat, no worries. But when my rook is on a8, don't think so. And yes, f5, don't do this, folks, don't do this. It's really bad for you. All right, moving on to the next. This is going to be same guy as now with the white pieces against a different opponent. This time it's a Caro-Kann defense. up to here it's reasonably normal. This is when things started to go a little bit astray. So queen b3, bishop takes, and we took on b6. Lord knows why. Normally there is some sort of a consensus that when these two queen moves are played, then neither side will really want to take, because that basically allows the other side to take back with the pawn, opening up the rook file and just making the position a little bit stronger. And likewise, white wouldn't mind black to take, because after pawn takes we have got now pawn recapture possibility on c4, and now we have got the a file. And actually, yeah, like I don't think that there are tactics here, because after queen takes we have queen b7 here. Yeah, I can even just play bishop e2, let this go, and then take here. So this doesn't work at all. And instead we ended up taking. Now that was not the reason for the loss, but it shouldn't have happened. Take c4, bishop takes b5. Now many people would say that, yeah, I take because it's double pawns. Now double pawns by default are not weaknesses, or not even a bad thing. That you have to actually apply that, similar to isolated pawns by the way. You have to apply it to the actual position. In an endgame they are likely to become bad, and they are likely to become weaknesses in certain scenarios. But when you have got such a compact pawn chain like this, and especially like this, you can hardly call this a weak pawn setup. On the contrary, they are actually very compact. They guard each other beautifully. They control a lot of important squares, and by placing pieces in between these two pawns, they are actually beautifully shielded. So this is totally a-okay for black as far as the pawn structure is concerned. Bishop back to d3, knight d5. We took it, it took back, and here we go. That's when disaster starts striking, because white needs to build a plan. Now this position I quite like actually for white, because it's easy to find a plan for one thing, and two, I think that the actual position is not bad at all. So they have got a pair of double pawns, we have got a pair of double pawns. The pawn structure indicates, pawn chain pointing that way, that we should play as white here. Now there is a very clear standard plan, which is f4, f5, gaining space on the king side, advancing the double pawn, hoping to trade it off, and then afterwards white could advance the other one behind, achieving quite remarkable progress on the king side. Now we have a couple of problems. Number one, on occasion d4 can be weak. Number two, a2 is annoyingly under pressure, so we need to deal with these problems. One of the ways to do it is I would probably play king e2 just to connect my rooks, and then probably I would pull the bishop back, because after f4 I would prefer not to have it outside of my pawn chain, because then it could get very annoyingly hassled. So I would do something like this. And I reckon the white is doing really well here. f5 is incoming. I can play rook g1 afterwards, or even beforehand. It just looks like a totally fine position to be in. Instead we played rook g1. I'm not quite sure why. Like, yeah, okay, I get it, sometimes you move the bishop g7 is hanging, but it doesn't really strike me as a plan. Knight a6 was played. Now this was a time to actually make a king move, and after knight b4, and yes, I know, listen carefully and bear with me, bishop b1, or even king e2 to make this point even better, knight b4 and bishop b1. But hey, you just said don't go back because the rooks are not connected. Yes, that's true, but now I have nowhere else to go. Could go to f5, but after the g6 I still have to come back home. So yeah, just drop back. The upside, however, now is that the knight is misplaced, the pawns can't really move, and after an eventual a3 I will be threatening to remove this bishop and hang the knight. So now these two are immobilized, but so are these two, so that's a fairly okay trade. And as I said, after a3 bishop moves, the knight will have to retreat when these two are still standing very badly, and my rook is ready to swing into the game. Instead we played a3, which is really bad because it doesn't stop anything at all on the b file. I can still play knight b4, I can play pawn b4. In fact, if anything, it provokes b4. Likewise with g6, by the way. The more I think about it, the more likely that white should provoke it, because I want to trade this f pawn off, and g6 gives me that opportunity so that then I can push up the other two and create a weakness on the king side. And likewise here black can't wait to trade this b pawn off because he has got another one. Knight c7, and disaster strikes again. Please note that white loses both games because of impulsive, meaningless pawn moves. No idea why this was played. I honestly don't, because even though I did say that b4 was a plan, right now, especially after the knight goes back, it's not really that great, because after, for example, king d2, b4, I just play a4, then I cement it in with b3, and my rook is good to go. So black doesn't really have a threat now, and in fact after knight e6, bishop e3, f4, f5 becomes a very, very real and annoying plan again for white. Excuse me, and it's not really that simple to stop. So once again, I quite like white's position here. But that was not to be, because b4 was played, and after bishop takes b4, actually knight e6 was played first, makes no difference, because both of these are on and neither of them, or sorry, both of them can't be defended at the same time. So bishop e3 and bishop takes b4, and that's all she wrote. The game was over. Very, very painful defeat on 2 occasions on impulsive, meaningless, pointless pawn moves. Totally playing on the wrong side. Should avoid pawn thrusts at all costs on that particular side, especially when they don't achieve anything tangible, but in this case it was just downright blunderous. So that is probably the most important lesson that is very typical of the amateur's mind, that the amateur's mind likes to play impulsive pawn moves in the belief that it gains space, it stops the enemy from doing A, B and C and so on, whereas all it does is just that it created 2 constant, very, very bad weaknesses. So even if it wasn't a blunder, now white would have to babysit the a3 pawn for the rest of the game, because it's constantly under pressure. So that was a very, very poor choice there, and that was basically the reason for the defeat. Once again, after king e2, knight e6, bishop e3, I think this position is really, really awesome. I really do like this. So yeah, that was the 2 games. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to analyze through them. I didn't even realize when I received them that they feature the same fundamental mistake, but yeah, now it's quite interesting that I look at it, that I found out the reason why RSN lost both of these games. Now, on a parting note, no, I can't do that. I wanted to show you a puzzle, but I will do that in my next video. I found a very cool puzzle on Facebook shared by a famous Hungarian grandmaster that I wanted to upload here, but maybe that will be a different video. So that will be it, guys, for now. I hope that you enjoyed what you heard and saw, and yeah, I'll be back with more soon. Thank you very much. Bye.